Hey everyone, Rob B here with Rob D, and you are listening to episode 275 of the Property Podcast. This week we've got a battle on our hands, old versus new. People get pretty heated with this one. They feel that you must do this one strategy and not the other. But which is best? Which is best for you, most importantly? Rob and I will also be looking at our own portfolios too, and reflecting on what's gone well and what hasn't.
Yes, welcome to the Property Podcast. Thank you for joining us, where every Thursday lots of property investors join us to become informed and inspired. Today, whether you are brand new to property and you're planning your first move, or you're a little way into it like we are and looking back at what you've done so far and trying to work out what you should do next, the type of property you buy is going to be a critical ingredient in that internal discussion you have with yourself. And so we're going to give you plenty to think about when it comes to that in today's episode.
So Rob, I like any news story where Liverpool is top of the league.
And I like any news story where I get to brag, so this is the perfect story for both of us. So this is a story from Letting Agent Today, revealed Britain's best and worst yields for buy-to-let. So there's been an analysis of over 500,000 properties, and it's found which postcodes have the strongest and the weakest yields. So let's start with the strongest, shall we? So this should make both of us happy. The two strongest are both in Liverpool, L7 and L6, and I own a property in L7, so I guess that means I get to brag that I own a property in the best location for buy-to-let in the whole country.
I'm sure it's actually your influence, Rob, that's made it happen. It's entirely possible.
I reckon so.
Down the bottom, no surprises. Yes, London dominating the majority of the bottom spots. Manchester, Edinburgh, Middlesbrough, some of the other areas that make up the top 10. No major surprises there. Like I said, it's great to see Liverpool top of the league. And Rob, you get to brag. So we all win.
It is the ideal news story. Even though the data suits us very nicely, I feel the need to mention a couple of oddities in here. Looking at the worst areas outside of London, Bournemouth has one of the worst postcodes, which is kind of what you'd expect because property prices there are generally pretty high. But one postcode in Crewe has a bit low one, which just seems like a really odd thing because, as we know, yields in Crewe are actually really good. And you've also got to consider that the areas up the top are largely because that's where you've got student properties, therefore lots of HMOs. So you're not really comparing like with like because you're comparing HMO yields to standard buy-to-let yields. So you've got to be careful when you look at news stories like this, because if you looked at this and go, oh, this means that I shouldn't be investing in Crewe because of this one random postcode where they've got this one random bit of data, that would clearly be wrong. And also if you go, oh, I'll just go and buy in this bit of Liverpool and do it as a single let, then everything will be great. But it won't be necessarily, because the news story doesn't mention that that is a student area and that's why you get the returns. So don't put too much faith in this kind of thing, but absolutely use it as a guide to broadly direct you towards the areas which might be best, but then do your research carefully from there.
And Rob, final fun fact, L6 is where I was born. No blue plaque yet, and it probably doesn't help capital growth or yields at all, but I'm sure now everyone feels that they get to know us a little bit more. Next week, Rob, we can talk about your Watford postcode.
Okay, so when you're eyeing up your investment, there's loads of decisions for you to make. So location, we've just talked about, that's obviously a massive factor. But then you've also got to think about what type of property you want to be buying. And we've talked a lot in the past about the debate between should you be buying a house or should you be buying a flat. But there's another question that comes up a lot as well. Should you be buying a new build property or should you be buying an older property that needs work? Now, of course, there is no answer to this question that's right for everyone. So you're not going to get to the end of this episode and we're going to go, yes, never buy an old property. You'd be mad to do so. But it's a really interesting discussion to have because in having the debate and coming to the right answer for you, there's lots of different things to think about and a lot of issues that kind of cast a light on lots of different things in property that are worth thinking about. So in this episode, we're going to run the whole way through the process of investing in a property and contrast new property versus old. And then next week, we've got a follow-up on this, which will build on some of these ideas. And we'll talk about that a little bit more at the end.
Okay, so first up is goals. And this is a great place to start when deciding on whether you should do new or old properties. Your goals will determine your strategy. And therefore, your strategy will tell you whether you should be doing new or old properties. So, for example, if you have aggressive goals, and what I mean by aggressive goals is that in a short space of time you want big results, buying new build properties and holding isn't going to work. Because you're going to get capital growth. Yes, you're going to get a rental return, but it's very much a long-term play. If you have a more aggressive goal, things have got to happen. You've got to take more risks. so you can potentially get bigger rewards. So you will look for old properties, but actually old properties where you can add a tremendous amount of value. So you might be doing flips, you might be doing refurb, letting, and then recycling some money out. They might be being turned into HMOs. There's all different things going on here. But for a new build, it wouldn't really make sense to do that if your goals are short-term and aggressive. But conversely, Rob, if you are in it for the long term and you want an easy life, then taking on a wreck might not be the best choice.
No, exactly, because over the long term, you're going to get the most of your growth from the general market, not from whatever you do. And as a general rule, newer properties that are in better locations tend to be more desirable. Therefore, they'll have the most people fighting over them when the property cycle is motoring along. Therefore, they're going to get the most growth. So you could buy an older property and make a chunk of money at the start by refurbing it and making a profit on doing so. But then over the next 10, 20 years, if that's the kind of time frame you're talking about, then you're probably going to get less growth from the wider market. So you'll have actually done more work and got less benefit out of it. So we often say that you should start by setting goals. And I think, Rob, this is an absolute cast iron example of why you must do that, because it's so easy to be tempted by what someone else is doing. See someone else having success with either buying new build properties or buying older properties and think, oh, well, it's worked for them. That's what I should do. But if you haven't taken the time to figure out what you actually want, you could go down completely the wrong track. And you'd have absolutely no way of knowing that if you hadn't taken the time to actually set your goals in the first place.
Absolutely. And worse still, not just copying, but people then say, you should do it this way. This is how I do it. But they know little or nothing about you and don't really understand what your goals are. Then be very wary, because they're biased by their own experiences. People get very passionate in property, and that's awesome. But it also means that people end up taking poor advice. What may be great advice for one person is actually terrible advice for another. And that's why starting with goals is so important, because it will help you rule in and rule out different approaches. Now, the next thing we're going to look at is finding a property. So what's best, new versus old? Well, when we find a property, you've got all the standard stuff you do. You use Rightmove, you use Zoopla, you speak to your local estate agents, you might deal with a property sourcer. That's fine. There are so many different ways. And actually, finding a property that's new or old is fairly easy. It's fairly simplistic, whatever one you decide to go for. But then it's finding a good deal is the next kind of layer. And people always want to get a good deal, and rightly so. So what's best? If you want a good deal, what should you be doing? Should you be doing new build or old?
Okay, let's start by looking at getting a deal on older property, because that's probably what the majority of people are going to be familiar with. So with older properties, there are often deals to be done, and that's for a couple of reasons. The first is that somebody owns that property already. That's why it's an older property. It sounds obvious, but that throws up some opportunities, because either it's owned by someone who lives there and they want to move on, or it's owned by an investor who's been making some money from it and is now deciding to get rid for some reason or another. Now, sometimes the person selling might not be too fussed, they're not in any particular rush, but sometimes they are going to be under real pressure to sell, especially if it's someone who lives there and they found their dream home, but they need to sell this one before they can move and they're risking losing it, or it's an investor who is struggling, they're losing money on the property, or they're about to get repossessed or something like that. That means that there's often a deal to be done because they need to sell quickly, and therefore if you can offer them that speed, they will sell to you for less than they otherwise would. The other factor is that because it's older, the property is not going to be absolutely perfect. That means that you're always going to be looking to chip away at the price to recognise the work that needs to be done, and you're going to be looking for opportunities where you can do work to the property that adds value over and above the work that you're actually doing. Because the property isn't perfect, that means that it's really hard to get a precise value on what a property is worth. Even if it's on a row of identical houses, there'll be some that have been maintained far better than others. There might be one where the boiler needs replacing. There might be another where it needs redecorating. Trying to actually factor all this in and come to what it's exactly worth is really hard. And when a market is inefficient and it's hard to get price discovery, that means that there's the opportunity to go in there and get a deal. If you know what it's going to cost you roughly to put the property right and you can get it for less than that, then that is a win for you. So I'd say, Rob, it's harder with older properties to know whether you are getting a deal because it's so difficult to find out what the price should be. But that does create opportunities. Whereas with newer properties, it's more straightforward, but there are opportunities there as well.
There are opportunities. If you go as an individual to buy a new build property, unless it's a bonkers hot market, you can normally get a bit of a deal. So when I mean a bit of a deal, they will normally look at doing things like flooring, because flooring actually doesn't come in as standard in many new builds, so they'll throw that in. Or turf if you're buying a house. Again, you'd think they'd put grass on your lawn, but again, not always the case. So they will do a little bit of a deal. Again, as an individual on a new build, we've taught you in the past that looking at when year ends are for these developers and trying to negotiate a deal then, because they may be a little bit more motivated to do a deal at that point. And when they're about to leave the site and they've got a few left is another time when they may be motivated to do a deal. So timing comes into play quite often with new builds. The other way you can do it is by negotiating volume. Now, I appreciate as a individual, this is harder to do. This is something we do at RMP, where we'll go in and say, we will take a certain amount if we can have this reduced price. Now, doesn't always work. The majority of times, deals don't happen. Either we're unhappy or they're unhappy, the deal doesn't come together. And it does take a lot of time and effort to put these type of deals together. However, getting a discount or a deal shouldn't be easy. So, what's best, new or old? Well, actually, it's fairly balanced. You can get a deal on both. You have to work, normally. You have to work hard to get a deal on both. It's not a guarantee either way. And you can overpay for both. So, at the point of purchase, make sure you're doing your research and make sure you're engineering the best deal you can at that point in time.
All right, so let's move on to the next stage then. So, you've gone through the torturous legal process and you finally got the keys in your hand. What do you need to do next? Well, this is where there are really big differences between these two types of property. With an old property, there's always going to be some kind of work to do. Now, it might just be cosmetic. There might just be a couple of walls that need painting or something like that, a new carpet to go down. Could be something really minor. You could be doing more significant work. So you could be replacing the kitchen and the bathroom. Or you could actually be doing even more than that and extending the property or reconfiguring it or adding in an ensuite or something like that. Now, clearly, the more that you're planning to do, the more of your time and energy it's going to take up. But you should be getting rewarded for that because you should have got a good deal on the property if there was work to be done. And if you're doing more major work, you should have calculated that the uplift is going to be worth it. But even if it is going to be worth it, you need to be aware that this is going to take up a significant amount of your time. Even if you're not doing the work yourself, you're going to be having to find tradespeople and manage those and decide on the spec and all kinds of stuff, which is going to be taking up some of your time. And of course, you're not going to be earning anything off the property while this is going on because you don't have tenants there. Now, we're going to be digging into some of that stuff a little bit more in next week's episode, and we'll talk about that later on. Now, Rob, I think that this is the crux of the whole thing. When you're buying an older property, you've got to put the work in, but hopefully you're earning that uplift. And if you do put in the work, then the rewards are there, but you need to be aware that there is going to be work to do.
Without doubt, the potential to add value, old wins hands down. It's just that stress wins hands down as well. Even if your project goes well, there is still going to be more stress and time committed to this strategy. So it's that balance. It's again coming back to risk reward. If you put the time in, hopefully the rewards will be better. But we've both used the word hopefully there because it doesn't mean it's a guarantee. You're not guaranteed that uplift. So make sure you do your research if you do decide to go down this path and get it right. And also, I meet a lot of people who have absolutely no experience in refurbing, have no skills, and want to do major projects on their first go. Maybe don't be, I mean, it's up to you, but I would advise possibly phasing into this strategy and not going for a massive refurb and a hugely ambitious project for your first one. But you may be a bit bolder than me. With new builds, it's a lot easier. When you complete, you probably want to snag the property. For those who don't know what snagging is, it's basically just going in and checking it to make sure that it is new. Like if you took on a new car, you wouldn't expect it to have dents, would you? And it's exactly the same with a new property as well. You go in, you check that it hasn't got any issues, and that process is called snagging. Once that's done, you're pretty much set. There may be some snags to sort out, but then the whole point of new build is that from that point on, it should be a lot easier. The setup's there. If it's in a city centre, you may need the furniture pack, but there are companies that do all that for you. You can even have your snagging done. So if you want, you can set up a new build property and never visit it. It's that easy to do. Now, of course, Like with old properties, things can go wrong with new builds too. You may end up buying from a developer that isn't that great, and it happens. So make sure you do your research on the developer and they are reputable and they've got a great track record. But if you do that research, you massively reduce that risk and you can take advantage of all the benefits. And the benefits are an easy setup and, if you want, a hands-off experience. So what's best long-term? New or old? Well, like we said right at the beginning, it's going to depend on what you want and your current life situation. That's the other thing you have to remember too. Are you able to execute a more aggressive strategy? You might want to, but does your life allow you to? If you work long hours, you might not be able to. You may want to do old properties and you may want to do refurbs, and that's more attractive to you, but your current life circumstances mean that you simply haven't got the choice, and therefore newer properties are the way to go, certainly for the short term anyway.
Yeah, and I think it's worth saying that the converse is true as well. It's very easy to get seduced by the idea of getting a new build, and because, it's going to be so easy and I'm going to attract all these really great tenants and this is going to be perfect for me as an investor who wants to be hands off. But if you have more aggressive short-term goals, or if you have very, very limited cash and you're just going to end up with your money stuck in the property and unable to move on for a couple of years potentially, then it's just not going to work for you. So while it might be really easy, there's no point going for the easy option if it's not going to help you achieve your goals. We are really labouring this point about goals, Rob, but it's so critical because it's unbelievable the number of people we see who have got themselves into a less than ideal situation, and it didn't have to be that way if they'd just given a bit more thought to what they were trying to achieve in the first place.
Yeah, it's easy to be seduced by either strategy. You think, wow, I'd love to do a refurb project and I find that really interesting. But your goals say you're in it for the long term and your life situation says you're time poor. It doesn't really stack. If your goals are long term and you're time poor, then maybe new build's the way to go. If you want to do refurbs, refurb your own house if that's your hobby, but the strategy might not fit. The opposite is true. You may be attracted by new builds and think, wow, owning that property in that prestigious area and that great deal is super attractive to me. But if you need to retire or want to retire in 3 or 4 years' time, then unless your goals are fairly modest, then new build's not going to work for you either. So it's not as simple as long-term new build, short-term old, but by setting out your goals and understanding what you want will really help you decide on the best path forward. So Rob, this leads us nicely to talk about our own portfolios. We've both done slightly different things, but also our thoughts have developed as we've gone on as property investors, which is understandable.
That's right, and my own portfolio has a mix of older properties and newer, not necessarily completely new build, but just a couple of years old. And that balance has shifted over time because my goals have shifted over time. When I started out investing, I didn't have much money, therefore I needed to maximise the money that I had by being in a position to add value and pull my cash back out. My motivation at the time was also to build up another stream of income, therefore yield was important to me. So I was going for properties that were older and in less good locations but yielded higher. And also I was in a very different situation in my life back then. I wasn't exactly swimming with time, I don't think anyone is, but I certainly had more time. So even though I wasn't getting hands-on and doing any of the work myself, that would be a terrible idea, I had more time for finding the deals in the first place, for finding tradespeople, for managing that process and being a bit more actively involved. As time has gone on, things have shifted. I'm now in a situation where I'm running a business which is taking up a vast amount of my time, and I've got a family, so I've got far less capacity for doing the tasks that I did before. And my priorities have shifted as well. Now I'm less motivated in building up an income stream for today, and I have less of a need to add value and pull cash back out of properties to reinvest now. I use property more as a vehicle for the future and a place to store some cash and grow some wealth for the long term. So I've ended up with a property that's a bit of a mix. As the cycle goes on, I'm sure that I will sell properties that haven't performed so well or don't serve my goals in the way that they used to. But I don't think there's anything wrong with that. When we talk about setting goals and choosing a strategy, it doesn't mean it has to be the strategy that lasts you forever. You just have to do what's right for you at the time. Then when circumstances change, you change accordingly.
Absolutely. Nobody is born a property expert, and Rob and I certainly weren't. So we've learned through our experiences, and it's our experiences that help us to inform you. So my approach, although it's always been through properties that have been hands-off, The types of properties has definitely changed. So I, in the past, have gone for properties that are new or in good condition, ready to let basically, that were a really good deal and a really good yield. And they were fine, but it wasn't really focused. And I would also mix it in with some more prestigious properties. So properties in city centres, and earlier on they were Leeds and Chester and other places. And what I've found is the better properties in the better areas not only have given me less trouble, given me better tenants generally, they've also given me superior capital growth. Now on paper these look attractive from one point of view, as they are properties that you'd go, ooh, I'd like to live there. But actually pretty dull because there's not a lot to do. The yields aren't that exciting. But ultimately, I want an easy life and I target capital growth. So right now, I'm only going after those types of properties. Something a bit different, something a bit special in really good towns or cities that I'm expecting capital growth in. So do I have any regrets about some of the properties I bought previously? Absolutely not. It's those experiences that have helped me form my current strategy. And I'm a far better and focused investor now because of that. Now, the great thing is, because of the podcast, hopefully you don't have to go through as many lessons as we did and get closer to that focus and get closer to the strategy that's right from you straight from the off. But even if you've been doing property for a while and your strategy's changed over time as well, don't worry. Property generally is very forgiving over the long term. Sometimes it causes you short-term pain, but over the long term, it's very forgiving.
So those are our experiences when it comes to newer properties versus older properties. Next week, we want to get deeper into buying properties that need work doing to them. So in next week's episode, we're going to be interviewing an investor who's been through that process multiple times. They've done it, they've had the learnings, they've had some real challenges, they've had some real successes as well, but they're still relatively new to the game, so they remember what it's like to go through that process for the first time. And I think that's going to be a really great discussion to take some of these lessons and some of the concepts that we've talked about today and make them a bit more concrete. So make sure you listen to next week's episode because that is going to be packed with great stuff.
Review time now, and it's a quick double from some wonderful hubbers. First up, we've got Daniel, and Daniel says, these guys know their stuff. I'm someone who listens to lots and lots of property podcasts a week, and I must say, their light-hearted but incredibly informative style really hits the mark. Well done, lads. Really worth listening to. And next up, we've got Almost Friday, who says, fair play to Rob and Rob. I've been listening for a month and I am saturated with their expert knowledge they share with others. Just need to increase my deposit and I can start putting this information into practice. 5 stars from both. Well, thank you so much, guys. Really appreciate it. And we appreciate everybody who gives us a 5-star review. The most popular business podcast on iTunes. And that's because of you guys. Thanks so much.
Okay, so as we mentioned last week, if you are mourning the absence of Resource of the Week, do not fear. It's going to be back very soon as part of something that we're calling Hub Extra. That's going to be linked into a very special email that we'll be sending out every Friday. If you're a member of the Property Hub, you'll be getting that. If you're not a member, put that right now. Do it now and you'll be in time to start getting that in your inbox very soon. That will also allow you to post in the Property Hub forum, where we would love to know your thoughts on buying new versus buying old. What have your experiences been? Let's carry on the conversation there.
Remember, if you'd like to find out about what Rob and I do outside the podcast, you can do by going to thepropertyhub.net/discover. We'll be back on Tuesday with Ask Rob and Rob. And of course, we're back next Thursday with the Property Podcast. So until then, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.